go to the app, comment this line out, and define my timeline animation like so. And let's start working on that. The first thing I would need is the motion. So I'll use like motion from framer motion. So I'll use like framer motion like so. Next, we have to change that to the motion.div. So I'll use like motion.div. And inside there, we're going to be defining our, you know what, I'm going to use like 1, 2, 3 like so. And we are going to be iterating over through there. So I'll provide a map, I mean like item inside there. And now we have to define our motion.div once again. So I'll use like motion.div and close there right here. I'm going to also provide the key, and key will be set to this item. And I'm going to also provide the class name and set there to background totally purple of 500, and margin for the left will be set to 2 rems. I'm going to also provide a padding all around will be set to 4, text will be set to totally wide, margin for the y-axis will be set to 2, rounded totally large. Save this file, and now we have to render, our items right here. So I'll use like item. Next, we have to define our variant. So I'll use like const item variants. It's going to be set to this object, and we have to provide the hidden prop. And on the hidden prop, we are going to be changing not the MD opacity, but just the opacity. Set that to 0. Provide a scaling. So scale will be set to 0.5, and rotation will be set to 180 degree. I'm gonna duplicate this line of code and change that to visible, and the opacity will be set to 1, the scaling will be set to 1, and the rotation will be set to 0. Now I'm gonna copy the name of there and use there right here for each item. So I'll use like variants, and here we have to specify the item's variant. Now I'm gonna go to the top and also provide my animation and stuff. So I'll use like flex, and items will be set to totally center. And now here I'm gonna hit enter a few times, and for the initial state, we're going to be providing a hidden state. And while this is in view, then we're going to be setting there to visible. Now underneath that, let's just also provide a transition, and the transition will be set to stagger children and set that to 0.5. I'm going to save this file, and now if I just refresh there, so 1, 2, 3, that's cool and everything. But now let me just refresh there once again, and now let me scroll down, so animation will start right here just like that. Let me try that once again. That's an amazing animation. Okay, yeah, I know that's simple, but still, that's an amazing animation, and a creative one, to be honest. Let's create the final one, which is an interactive hover and in-view animation. So create a grid of card that scale and changes the color when we hover over there, and animate them when they are in the view. So what do we have to do? We have to create a grid of layout card, then we can use the while in view prop for the entrance of the animation, and we can provide the hover effect by using a Tailwind CSS in the framer motion. So you know what, let's just start working on that. I'm gonna go ahead and create a component with the name of interactive cards.tsx, not tsds or something like that. Let's just create this component and go to our app and define the right here. So I'll just remove the creative or interactive animated cards. Let's just go to there. The first thing that we would need is the motion. From where? From the framer motion. Next, you have to create our grid. So I'll provide the class names, and the class will be set to grid, and grid columns will be set to 2, gap will be set to 4. Inside there, we have to create a few items like 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we have to iterate over through there. So I'll use like only the item. We don't need the index. Or yeah, you know what, I'm gonna also specify the index right here. And inside there, we are going to be using our motion.div. Let's just use our motion.div and close, or you know, we're not going to be closing there like this. We're going to be closing there like so. So I'm going to use like h3, and I will say like card and render my items inside there. I'm going to also provide the class name of text2xl and save my file. This is how they looks like. So we are now getting card 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to also provide a bit of classes to this. So I'll use like background blue of 500, and padding all around will be set to 6. Text will be set to totally white, and text will be set to center. And we also have to make it totally rounded large. Save our file. And now we are getting these cards right here. I'll also provide the key. So for this key, we have to provide our index. Save my file. And next we have to provide our initial state. So initially my animation will start like this. So we have to provide the scale, and scale will be set to 0.8. And while they are in the view, so in that situation, we're going to be scaling it up to 1. While somebody hover over there, so in that case, we are going to be scaling there to 1.1, and we are going to be also changing its background color to totally 3B at 2 F6, like so. And I'm going to also provide a bit of transitions. So for this transition, the duration will be set to 0.3 seconds. Now let me save my file, and now if I just refresh there, here you can see they are now appearing. If I hover my mouse over to there, they are also looking cool. But now if I scroll up And now if I scroll down here, you can see we're now getting this smooth kind of a yeah, we are getting this animation, but we can totally change the duration to like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 seconds rather. Now let's just refresh there and scroll down. So it's gonna take a while to complete this animation. I'm gonna change that to like maybe 1 second, complete 1 second. Let's go to the top, and when they are in the view, so now we are getting these items right here. So yeah, that was our while in view prop practice. Welcome to the projects module. So in this one, we're going to be building a lot of projects. So we're going to be starting from the very basics project, and then we're going to be jumping into a bit advanced. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to open my terminal right here, and I'm going to make it a bit bigger so you guys can see it a bit clear like so. I'm going to use npm create with add latest and hit enter right here. I'm going to give it the name of like fm, like for the framer motion projects or something like that. I'm going to choose react.js and TypeScript. Let's just go into the fm projects and use npm i to install all of the packages. Now that's successfully done. I'm going to go ahead and go to the framer motion, not a framer.com, but we want to go into the framer dash motion. Okay, so we are now inside the framer motion. I'm going to click on the getting started. I'm going to copy this script and place it right here inside the terminal. Whilst doing that, I'm going to also go ahead and go to the Tailwind CSS, click on the getting started, and then I'm going to choose the framework and guides, go to the weed and copy all of them, place them right here. So it's going to install the Tailwind CSS, and I'm going to also initialize the only hitting enter. Okay, so now let me just hit enter. So it's going to also initialize my Tailwind CSS. I'm going to copy all of that content, and now let me open that in my VS Code. Next, I'm going to go into the where is my tailwind.config file. I'm going to replace that with this new content. I'm going to also use npm run dev. I'm going to do that in a few seconds, but first of all, we have to remove the public folder, also the assets folder, the app.css file, and remove every single thing from the app.tsx and replace that with the rafce, and remove every single thing from there as well. And now I'm going to copy all of that component, place it right here, and then we have to just test this out. So I'll go ahead and go to my app and replace that with this new content. I'm going to use npm run dev to run there on my local host 5173. Yep, everything is working the way we expect him to work. I'm gonna also quickly go ahead and go to the package.json and check for the, oh, there we go. We are now using a framer motion, which means like this is the correct version of the framer motion. The first project that we are going to be building will be super basic project. So what are we building? We are building, you guessed it, first of all we have to create a components folder, and we are now building a scroll indicator. And now let me just create a .tsx file, and I'm going to be using the rafce inside there. Go to my app once again and register there right in here. So I'll just remove that and replace it with the div. And I'm going to be rendering my scroll indicator and close there. Check this out. So now we are getting that scroll indicator, which is looking cool. So let's just start working on them. I'm going to go back, and the first thing that we would need is obviously we would need the motion from the framer motion. Come on, from the framer motion. I'm gonna save this file. Next, we have to provide a bit of height to this. So I'll just provide like class name, and the height will be set to 200 viewport height, and also the padding will be set to 20 pixel. I'm gonna save this file, and inside there we have to create first of all our red line, okay, or indicator line, whatever you want to call them. So to create that, I'm gonna only use the motion.dev. Come on, we have to use our motion.dev, and I'm gonna close them like so. I'm going to also provide a bit of styling to this. So it's going to be set to fixed, and the top will be set to 0. Left will also be set to 0. Right will be set to 5 pixel. You can increase and decrease there if you wanted to. And then we're going to be changing the color of that to like red 500 like so. I'm going to save this file and go back. Check this out. So we are not able to see anything. That's because we are now setting the top value to 0 and also the left value to 0. So that's why we cannot see something, but we will see that in a few seconds. Next, we have to create a random text. So if you want to get a lot of text, first of all, we are going to be creating a div with the class of margin for the top. There's going to be an arbitrary class. So I'm going to be providing like 50 pixel to there. And inside this div, I'm going to be using like my array. So I'll use like dot 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 array, and then here I'm going to provide like 100 item. Now you want to iterate over through all of that 100 item. We don't need the data, we only need the index. Okay, so inside there I'm going to be using my paragraph, and I'm going to close there, and I'll just say like lorem ipsum or something like that. And here we also have to specify margin for the top of 20 pixel, and here for the key I'm going to also specify the index right here. So if I save there, now we are getting this UI, and we are also getting a lot of text which we can scroll through. Finally, we have to work on our indicator. So to work on that, the first thing that we would need is the scroll on the y-axis progress from where you guessed it, from the use scroll function. So now we are going to be getting there, and this should be, god damn it, scroll y progress. Okay, so we're going to need that. Next we have to use our use transform for the line width. So I'll use like const line width, and that's going to be set to the use transform hook, not a stat but transform hook. For the initial value, we are going to be providing this motion value, which is a scroll y progress, and I'm going to specify the comma. And what do we have to do? I'm going to provide both of these stats. On the initial stat, when it starts from 0, you want to set the width to be 0%. But when it reaches to the 1, we want to change that to 100%. As simple as that. Okay, and now we have to render that inside our div. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be using my style, because now in this case, we cannot use the animate prop. And for the width, I'm going to set that to the line width. I'm going to also provide a bit of transition to this. So I'll just use like transition, and for this transition it's going to be set to like width and 0.1 second and ease. Let me just save my file. Check this out. So now if I scroll there, I want you to notice this area right here. So as soon as I scroll there, it will scroll with me, and this is a lot of text. So here you can see we are now getting this amazing indicator, and you can totally change the shape of there, you can totally change the color of there, you can do a lot of stuff with there. But yeah, I am done with this basic scroll indicator project, and that was our basic first project. Welcome to the basics project number 2. So in this one, we are going to be creating amazing loader. So how are we going to be doing that? First of all, we have to create our components folder, and inside there we have to define our loader.tsx file. And I'm going to be using my RAFCE and render there right here to the DOM, like so. Check this out. We are now getting a loader, which is looking cool. So first thing first, if I can get my cursor today, I'm gonna have to grab the motion from where you guessed it, and then we have to provide our classes to it. So I'll use like flex, and also items will be set to totally center, justify will also be set to center, and height will be set to totally screen, so that we can set every single thing totally on the center of the view. Next we have to define our div. So I'll define my div, and I'm gonna also provide a bit of classes today. It's gonna be set to relative, and the width will be set to 16. The height will also be set to 16. Border all around will be set to 4, and border for the top will be set to 4, and border color will be set to blue 500. Border will be totally solid rounded. So now let me save my file and check this out. So now we are getting this amazing circle at the middle of the viewport. Next we have to define another div. So I'll use like div once again. I'm going to also specify classes to it, so it's going to be set to absolute, and here we are going to be using inset of 0. Border, come on, border will be set to 4. Border color will be set to blue 300, and border totally solid. Make it totally rounded 4, and save my file. Let's just test this out. We are now getting this inner border inside there. Finally, we have to animate there, and to animate there, we are going to be converting our div to the motion div, and also convert this div to the motion.div, like so. Okay, and now we can specify our animation inside there. So I'll use like animate, and on the animate we're going to be rotating there. Let's just use the rotate, and rotate, come on, rotate, rotate there on the 360 degree. I'm going to also specify transitions to there. For the transition, we're going to be providing a duration, and duration will be set to 1, and it's going to repeat infinitely. I'm going to also provide the easing, and easing will be set to linear. Save our file. And now it's not going to do anything for now, because we also have to change this one to the motion.div and also specify animation for that. So I'll use like motion.div. Now we can specify our animation inside their div. I'll use animate, and on this animate I'm going to provide the opacity, and on this opacity we're going to be using our keyframe. So start from 0, start from 1, and then go to 0.5, and then go to 1 back. Okay, so we are going to be also copying this transition. Now let me just place there right here, save our file, and let me just refresh there. Nothing is happening. I don't know why. Oh, I forgot to include the transparency. So I'll use like style, and here for the style we're going to be setting the border top color. We have to make that as a transparent. So now if I just provide this, save my file, and now we are getting this amazing loader right here. So we only have to write this amount of code, like we have to provide the animate and set there to like 360 degree, and then we can specify the transition and duration, stuff like that. And we have to set the border top color to transparent, and it's going to give us this amazing loader animation right here. Welcome to the project number 3. So in this one, we are going to be creating our draggable card, and trust me, this is not going to be just a simple draggable card. Okay, so let's just work on that. First of all, we are going to be creating our components folder, and inside there we're going to be creating our draggable card.tsx file, not txcs file, just a tsx, and I'm going to be defining my rafce inside there. Go to our app component and register there right in here, not like this, but we're going to be closing there, because here we are going to be also specifying a text inside there. So I'll use like card1, and then I'm going to save there. I'm going to duplicate there a few times. So now let's just change that to card2 and card3. We are going to be also providing different styles today. So for this styling, we are going to be specifying something called the linear gradient. Okay, so I'll use like background, and I'm going to provide a linear gradient for all of these components. So I'll use like linear and then gradient and close there. So for the first one, 135 degree, and then we are going to be providing this color like F093FB, and starting from the 0%. Now we have to specify the last color, so I'll use like F5576 and then C, and we want to show that totally 100%. That's going to be the first gradient. Now for the second one, we are going to be providing 135 degree once again. Let's use our degree, and we are going to be using this color like 5EE7DF. It's going to start from the 0%, and then we want to use this color like B490, come on, 90, and then CA, and we will show that 100%. And now we have to provide like 135 degree once again, and provide this color like FF9A, 9E, and starting from the 0, then provide like FECFEF 99%, like that. I'm going to save this file. And yeah, this is how we are going to be providing our background color of linear gradient today. And now let's start working on our draggable component. The first thing that we would need is our motion. So I'll use like motion, come on, motion, from where? From the framer motion. And inside there, we are going to be destructuring all of the children, like this text, which you can see right here, like this card2, card3, and so on and so forth. And we would also destructure the styling, which we are now providing right here, like this style, which will have the background of this linear gradient. Okay, so now we are destructuring them, but we are going to be also creating an interface for this. So I'll use like interface. This is just a TypeScript stuff. If you don't know TypeScript, you don't even have to worry about that. And I'm going to say like draggable card prop. Okay, so I'll just create that right here, and I'm going to provide the children, and children will be coming from the React node. And then come on, let's just grab that from the React node. And then we're going to be using the style property, and we shouldn't have to provide the comma in there, and the style will be a CSS properties, like that. Now I'm going to copy the name of that and annotate that right here, just like that. Now we have to use that inside our UI. So I'll just change that to like motion.div, and here I'm going to render their children. So I'll use like children, like so. And inside there, let's just provide our class name. So I'll use like poly rounded 2XL, and shadow will be set to large, padding all around will be set to 5, margin for all around will be set to 2, width will be set to 52, and height will be set to 72 in this case. This is use our 72. Flex and items will be set to center. Justify will be set to center. God damn it, I can't even type today. And text will be set to white, text will be set to extra large. So these are going to be forward styling. Now here we are going to be also rendering our background gradient, which we are now specifying right here. So we have to use a style prop for that, and then we are going to be getting that style, and we have to paste it right here. And now if I save my file, this is what we are getting right now. We are now getting the card 1, 2, and 3, and they are looking cool. I'm gonna also make them center, so I'm gonna go into my app once again, and here for this div, we are going to be providing a class name, and it's going to be set to flex, and justify will be set to center, and also items will be set to center, and height will be set to 100 VH. Close there, and I'm going to also provide a background color of F3, F3, F3. Close there, and here you can see we are now getting our cards, but they are not draggable. So now let's just make them draggable. And to make them draggable, they are super amazing to make draggable. So I'll use like drag, And I'm going to also provide a constraints for them. And for these constraint, we're going to be providing a left value and it's going to be set to minus 200. I'm going to also provide the right value and it's going to be set to positive 200. And the top value will be set to minus 200 once again, and provide the bottom value of 200. So now let me just save my file. And this is how they looks like, but they are not looking still that cool. I also want to provide the while hover animation. So while somebody hover over there, so we want to do something with them. So I'm gonna provide the while hover, and here we have to provide the scaling, and scaling will be set to 1.1. We just only want to increase there by 1%. Let me test this out. So let's just refresh there. If I hover over them, yep, they are looking cool. But now I'm gonna also provide the while tap when somebody taps over there. So when I tap them, so while tap, and on the while tap I'm gonna provide the scaling of 0. I was trying to be some goddamn fucking pervert. So you know, if I just hover over there and click on there, we are now getting this animation, and that's looking super cool. And yeah, you can provide transitions if you want to. So I'll just write like transitions of duration 2 seconds, and now if I hover over there, it's gonna give us a slow transition. Let me change that to 1, and here you can see still they are looking cool, but this is super slow. I'm gonna also change that to like 0.6 or something like that. Let me hover over there, and yeah, they are now looking a bit cool in my opinion. That was our card or draggable card project in the Framer Motion. Welcome to the project number 4. So in this one, we're going to be building amazing carousel. So I'm going to go ahead and create a components folder, and inside there, I'm going to define the carousel.tsx file. I'll use the RAFCE, save this file, and now register there inside our app component like so. So I'm going to save this file and test this out. So here you can see we're now getting the carousel, but this is not something that we want. So I'm going to go ahead and make that totally center. So I'll use like flex, and justify will be set to center, and items will also be set to totally center, and height will be set to totally screen. And here you can see we're now getting a carousel, which is now perfectly at the center of the viewport. Next, I'm going to go into the carousel. And the first thing that I want to do is that I want to import the motion from where? From the Framer Motion. Next, we also have to define our images. So here are all of the images that I'm going to be using inside this project. So if you want to use these same images, you are more than welcome to use there. Or if you want to use your own one, you are still more than welcome to use your own one if you wanted to. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to the index.css file and place a bit of styling right here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to change the background color to totally black. For the button, the background color will be set to black, border will be set to none, padding 10 pixel, cursor position top will be set to 50, transform property will be set to translate on the y-axis of minus 50%, z-index will be set to 10, color will be set to totally white, and font size will be set to 1.5 rem. And when somebody hover over there, so we are going to be changing its color to like the opacity of that. So you know what, this is how it looks like right here. Currently we cannot see anything because we don't have any content inside there. So now let me go ahead and start working on that. So the first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to define my stats. So I'll use like first of all the current index, and it's going to be set to the set current index. And now we are going to be using our use state, and the initial value will be set to 0. I'm going to also define for the hover state. So I'll use like is hovered, and then set is going to be equals to the use state, and the initial value will be set to false. I'm going to also create one more for the thumbnail. So I'll use like show thumbnails, and then set show thumbnails. It's going to be equals to the use state, and the initial value will be set to false. So that's cool. Now let me go ahead and go to the UI and remove this carousel from there. And here I'm going to provide a bit of styling to there. So I'll use like class name relative, and width will be set to 50%, and also totally rounded large. Overflow will be also set to hidden. Inside this div, we're going to be first of all defining our clickable thumbnails. So I'll just write like clickable, come on, clickable thumbnails just for myself. I'm going to use the motion.div because we're going to be animating there. So now let me render the div, and this div will have a few classes. So I'll use like the class name, and we are going to be rendering all of that classes totally dynamically. So that's why I'm using this template later on. So I'll use like flex, and margin for the bottom will be set to 2 rem, and transition come on, this is not transition all, and transition will be set to opacity, and duration will be set to 300. Now we are going to be rendering our thumbnail totally dynamically. So if show thumbnail or is hover, if that is the case, so then we are going to be changing the opacity to 100. But if that's not the case, so what do we have to do? We have to use the opacity of 0 inside there. Okay, that's also done. Now here inside this div, we are going to be iterating over through all of their images that we are now currently setting. Okay, so now let me just provide there right here, and inside there I can use the map method on there, and I can get the image and also the image index. So inside there we also have to define our div. I'm going to duplicate this line of code and close them, and here we have to specify the key, and the key will be set to this index. So I'm going to copy the name of them and place it right here, and I'm going to also attach a lot of classes to there. And once again we are going to be using a dynamic class, so that's why we are now using these template literals. So I'll use like width will be set to 10 rem, and also height will be set to 5 rem, and then outside from there margin for the top will be set to 2 rems. I'm going to also set the cursor to totally pointer and rounded large. Overflow will be set to totally hidden. Border all around will be set to 2. Now let me just save my file, and that's going to be it, but I'm going to also render my content dynamically. So if our current index is equal to this index, let me just write triple equals to, if that is set to this specific image index, so in that situation we want to provide the border blue of 500. But if that's not the case, we are going to be changing the border to totally transparent. So now let me just save there, and inside this div I'm going to render my image. So I'll use like the img tag, also the src for the source, and for the source we are going to be rendering that image which we are now iterating over through. Okay, so we are going to be rendering all of that images, and now I'm going to also provide the alternative text for that. So I'll use like alt, and for this alt I'm going to say like I don't know, thumbnail or something like that, and then index on index +1. I'm going to also provide a bit of classes today. So width will be set to totally full, and height will also be set to totally full. Object totally cover, and come on, cover, and close the like so. So I'm going to save my file, and now let me just refresh there. We are now getting our images. We cannot see anything, and the reason is we are now setting that to false. So now if I set that to true, come on, let's just write a true and save my file. So now we are getting these images. I can also change that to like maybe 2 or something like that, and now if I just refresh there, we would be able to see this image selected right here. Okay, so if I change that to I don't know, maybe 1, and now if I save my file, so it's gonna select this image right here, so which is something, yeah, that we want. Okay, so that's our basic thumbnail images, and now let's work on the real images. So what I'm going to do is that I'm gonna comment or hide them from the UI, and next we are going to be rendering the actual actual images right here. So now underneath them we're going to be creating our div, and this div will have the class name of legs, and also inside this div, what do you want to do? We want to define another div. So for this div we are going to be iterating over through all of our items. So I'll use like the images once again. Come on, that images, and now let's just iterate over through this. So I'll use the map method and provide the image and also the index itself. So inside there we're going to be using a div, and now let me just duplicate that and change that to a div one more time. And here I'm going to have to specify the index like so, and also I'm going to provide the class name of minimum height will be set to totally. Okay, so I mean like minimum width will be set to totally full, and here we have to also render our image. So I'm going to also provide the src, and for the source we are going to be providing the image, and for the alternative text I'm going to say like slide, come on, slide, and here we have to render our index +1, and that's totally done. I'm going to close there, but I'm going to also provide the class name of width will be set to totally full. Save my file, and we are now getting these images which are not looking that great, to be honest, but yeah, we are going somewhere, and now we are getting these images. You know what, I'm going to also go ahead and provide the class name of flex to this one. Now if I save my file, and our UI is looking more than great right here. So we are now getting all of their images. And by the way, you can also definitely go ahead and change these images to something else that you prefer, but in my case that's going to be it. I'm going to also hide them, and now underneath there we are going to be providing our buttons. So let's just write like render buttons or something like that. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define my button, and this button will have a lot of classes, but I'm going to provide my left icon. So I'll use like the HTML entity, which is to use the end and then #1094. This is a special HTML entity, and I also forgot to close there, so we are going to be also closing there. Now if I save my file, so here you can see we are now getting this left or right entity or whatever you want to call that. I'm talking about this icon right here. So this is basically something called the HTML entity. If you guys don't know about that, you can definitely go ahead and check out my HTML and CSS course if you prefer there. But I'm going to provide the class names, and these class names will be totally dynamic. So I'm going to use like the absolute, and the left value will be set to 4 transform, and here not translate but transform, and here we also have to set the translate to the y-axis. So I'll use like y-axis on 1 or 2, and then padding all around will be set to 2. We are going to be also providing a bit of transition to that, so let's just use our transition, and the transition will be set to the opacity, and I'm going to also provide the duration of 300 in this case. And now we have to render our content totally dynamically, so is hovered. So in that situation we are going to be providing the opacity of 100, but if that's not the case, we're going to be providing the opacity of 0 to there. So now let me show you that. Here you can see nothing is happening, but now if I hover over there, oh, you cannot see that because we also have to change the set. I forgot to do that. So I'm gonna duplicate this line of code like so, and here I'm gonna also change the HTML entity to something else. So I'll use like instead of providing a 4, I'm gonna change that to 5, and this is how it looks like. We cannot see that, but you will see them very soon. So what I'm going to do is that I'm gonna take care of the UI and also the stats. I'm gonna hide there. So let's start from the thumbnails. I'm gonna expand there, and here we're going to be attaching the, what do we call it, our event handler. So I'll use like the key, and the key will be set to the index. I'm gonna also attach the on click event handler. When somebody clicks on there, we're going to be firing this function, which is a selected slide, and here we have to specify our index inside there. Now let me go ahead and create this selected slide. So I'll use like const selected slide. It's gonna take an index, and index will be set to a number. We have to annotate it as a number for our TypeScript, and now we are going to be using like set current index, and it's going to be set to that index which we are now getting. And we also have to provide like set show thumbnail, and we have to set that to true. And also I'm going to be using a Windows object, and obviously gives us a TypeScript error, so I'll use like Windows set timeout. Come on, set timeout, and here we have to specify or set show thumbnail, and we're going to be setting that to false, and the duration will be set to 5 seconds. So I'm going to save this file. I'm going to copy the name of that and provide there right here. Instead of a selected, we're going to be changing that to a select. Oh, and what the hell am I doing? I'm going to have to cut that from there and put that right here like so. So now let me just save my file. Now if I just refresh there, here you can see we are now getting the images, but now if I click on this one, it's going to select that one. If I remove my cursor from there, and here you can see that images will disappear. So if I hover them back and click on there, here you can see it's gonna make it appear once again. So that's also cool. But now let's just take care of these images. So like whenever I choose some image from there, we also want to update that image. First thing first, I'm gonna hide that, and I'm gonna go ahead and go to the actual images and expand this one. Now let me attach my on mouse enter, and here we have to set that to the set is hovered, and that's gonna be set to true. And now I'm gonna also provide the on mouse leave, and here it's gonna be set to come on, what the hell, it's gonna be set to the is hovered, and that's gonna be set to false in this case. So I'm gonna save my file. Inside this div, I'm gonna make that as a motion div, so I'll just change that to motion.div, and I'm gonna also change this one to the motion.div. Okay, so I'll just use like motion.div, and let's just save there. We are getting some sort of error, and we did import it there. I don't know why we are getting this error. What the hell? We are now closing the here. You know, I'm gonna change the, okay, now that's looking better. And now if I save my file and test this out, so here you can see we're now getting these images, and now if I hover over there, we're also getting these HTML entities right here, which is also something that we want, but I don't know why the hell we are getting these images. I'm gonna go to the top, and you guessed it, I forgot to include the N. Now let me just save there. We are only getting this one image, and I'm gonna also take care of this HTML entity. So let's just go to the bottom, and here instead of providing a left, I'm gonna change there to the right. And now if I hover over there, so now we are getting this amazing UI. I can also choose different images if I wanted to, but now if I click on this image, or if I click on these buttons, I want to change this image. How can I go about doing that? This is how we are going to be doing this. So let's just go ahead and go to the button and attach my own click event handler on there in previous slide. Okay, so this is going to be a function which we are going to be creating in a few seconds. And also on this one, we are going to be attaching the event handler, and we're going to be saying like next slide. Okay, so now let me just copy this previous one, and let's just start working on that one. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define my previous one. So I'll use like const previous slide, and inside there we have to define our set current index, and inside this set current index we are going to be providing our previous index. Now here what do we have to do? We have to get the previous index, and then -1 times the images dot length. then we have to multiply there, and we also want to get the remainder, so that's why we are using this modulo operator. So let's just use our images.length. Okay, so it's going to give us a previous image. So now let me just refresh there. We are not going to be able to see anything, and that's because of this function. So I'm going to also go ahead and create this function right here up above. So I'll use like cons next slide, and inside there we're going to be setting the current index to the previous index. Come on, previous index, and then here we have to use our previous index once again, and then plus 1. Now we have to use the modulo operator on the images.length. So now if I save my file, and here you can see we're now getting this UI. If I click on there, it's going to give us the next image right here, but it is not updating this one. Okay, so I can also click on that one. I can also click on this previous one. It's going to also update there. So here you can see if I click on that one and click on the previous one, okay, it is not even showing nothing. So to fix that issue, we're going to be first of all providing our initial state, and for this initial state we're going to be setting that to the x-axis of minus 100%, and also underneath there we're going to be using the animate prop, and on this animate prop we're going to be changing that to this minus the current index, and then times, come on, times 100%, not 1000 but just 100%. And also you want to provide a bit of transitions to this, so I'll use like the duration, and the duration will be set to 1. And here you can see if I just click on this image, it's going to show us that image. If I click on there, it's going to show us this image. But now if I click on this one, I don't know what just happened. This is some kind of a bug or something. No, this is cool. We are now getting these images. If I click on there, it's going to bring it back. This is not something that I wanted. Let's just go ahead and figure this out. So we have a previous slide, and then we have a next slide. I guess there is something wrong with the previous slide. Oh, you know what? I'm providing a times. Instead of a times, we have to change that to plus symbol. So now if I just refresh there, we are going to be getting all of that images. If I click on this one, so it's going to give us the last image, then the next one, and then the next one, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that was our basic carousel by using our Framer Motion. Welcome to the 5th project of this course. So in this one, we're going to be building amazing animated sidebar. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define my components folder, and inside there we're going to be defining the sidebar.tsx file. So I'll use like the RAFCE, save my file, and register there right here, just like that. I'm going to also make it totally perfectly centered, so I'll use like flex, and justify will be set to center, and also items will be set to totally center. The height will be set to screen, width will be full, and also background gray of 950. Let's just save our file, and this is how it looks like. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to also specify the text of totally white, and yeah, this is how it looks like currently. Now let's get into the sidebar and start working on there. The first thing I would do is that I'm going to import the motion from where? From the Framer Motion. We're going to be also defining our state, like whether our sidebar is open or closed. So I'll use like is open, and then set is open. It's going to be equals to the use state, and here we have to specify the initial value of false to there. Now let's get into the UI. So I'll just remove them and provide the class of relative to there. Okay, so inside there we're going to be first of all defining our backdrop, which we are going to be doing in a few seconds. But now underneath there we have to start working on our actual sidebar content. Okay, so I'll use like sidebar content, and here we can use our motion.div. So I'll use like motion.div and close there, and inside this motion div I'm going to specify a few classes, like it's going to be set to totally fixed, top will be set to 0, and left will be also set to 0, height will be set to totally full, and width will be set to 64. Come on, 64, like that. Background gray of 900, and text totally white. Shadow will be set to totally large. So now let me just save this file. Next we're going to be defining our variants. So I'm going to go to the top and define my sidebar variants right here. So I'll first of all provide the open state. When it is open, so we want to set the initial x value to 0, and I'm going to also specify the opacity to 1, and the scaling will be also set to 1. So now I'm going to just provide a comma, and I'm going to also provide the closed one. So close, so when it is closed, we want to set the x-axis to minus 100%, and also the opacity will be set to 0, and scaling will also be set to 0.8. So I'm going to copy the name of there and provide there right here inside or sidebar. Okay, so I'll use like the variants, and for these variants we're going to be providing our sidebar variants now, which means like I can definitely use my initial state, and for the initial state we're going to be setting that to closed. I can also use the animate. So here what I'm going to do is that I'm going to pass my content totally dynamically. So if this is open, you want to use the open state. But if that's not the case, so you want to use the closed state. I'm going to also provide the transition to this, so I'll use like the transition. The type will be set to one of my favorite type, which is a spring, and also the stiffness will be set to 300 and damping will be set to 30. Now let me just save there. Inside there you cannot see anything, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to provide a bit of content to there. So I'll use like pairing all around will be set to 4, and inside there we have to define our button, and this button will also have a few classes like absolute. Also the top will be set to 4, right will be set to 4, and z index will be 10. So now let me just hit tab. We also have to specify padding all around to 2 and background gray of 800, text only white and rounded full, and on the focus state we want to change the outline to totally none, and it's gonna just say like you know what, we have to render the icon. First of all, we have to install our icons library, so I'm going to be using like npm i and then react icons, so it's going to install them inside my project. Now they're successfully installed, so I'll use like npm run dev. Now here we have to render our iomd arrow back. Okay, so I'll just render there, and I'm going to also provide a bit of classes to it, so I'll use like the height will be set to 6 and the width will be also set to 6. So now let me just save my file and refresh there. We cannot see anything. That's because now our initial state is set to false. So if I set that to true, save my file, and here you can see we're now getting this sidebar with this icon. So if I set that to the false once again, save my file, yeah, that will totally make it disappear. Now I'm going to collapse this button, and underneath this button I'm going to specify my h2. So I'll use like h2 with the class of text to excel, and font will be set to totally bold. Margin for the bottom will be set to 4, and I'll use like filters inside there. You know what, I'm gonna go to the top and make them as a true so that we can see them. And here you can see we're now getting our filters, which is something that we want. And now underneath this h2, what do we have to do? We have to once again define our motion.dev. So I'll use like motion.dev and close them. Inside this motion.dev, I'm gonna specify the classes of space on the y-axis of 4. I'm gonna also provide the variants, so I'll go to the top like so and define my variants right here. And these variants are going to be a lot of variants, so I'll use like const, and here we have to create our container variants. And inside there, first of all, we are going to be providing the open state, then we are going to be also providing the closed state. Okay, so let's start from the first one, which is the open state. So we are going to be using our transition. Come on, transition, and inside this transition we are going to be providing a stagger. Come on, stagger children, stagger children, and that's going to be set to, come on, stagger children will be set to 0.2, and I'm going to also provide the delay between them. So delay between the children is going to be set to 0.1, and same thing will apply for this closed one. So I'm going to copy them. Now let me just place it right here, and instead of providing a 1, I'm going to change there to 0, and I guess that's going to be fine. Now I'm going to copy the name of them and go to the bottom, and here we have to specify there right here. So I'll use like a variants and provide my container variants inside there. So now let me just save my file, and which also means that now I can use the initial state, and initially my state will be set to closed, and on the animate we want to use like if it is open, then we want to use like the open state. If that's not the case, so we want to choose the closed one. So now let me just save my file. Inside this div, we are going to be defining yet another div, which will be also motion.dev. So now let me just close them. And here for this motion.dev, we are going to be also providing a variants. So I'm going to go to the top once again, and here we have to specify our item variants. So I'll use like const item variants, and inside there we have to use the open state. And for this open state, we're going to be setting the opacity to 1, and on the y-axis is going to be set to 0, and for the scale we are going to be increasing there to 1. Now here we also have to provide for the closed state, so I'll use like the opacity, and opacity will be set to 0. On the y-axis is going to be set to -20, and for the scaling we are going to be using like 0.95. I'm going to go ahead and copy the name of there and place there right here for this div. So I'll use like the variants, and here we have to specify our items variants inside there. First of all, I'm going to be using the h3 with the classes of text only extra large, and the font will be set to semi bold. It's going to say like category or categories rather. And here now underneath them we are going to be using our ul and then li, and for this each li we are going to be defining a label with the class of inline flags, and also the items will be set to center, and margin for the top will be set to 2. We're not going to be providing the HTML4, and for the label we're going to be defining our input field with the type of checkbox. So I'll use like checkbox, and then we're going to be also providing a class names, and the form is going to be set to a form checkbox like so. Underneath that, we also have to provide our span, and it will have the margin for the left, and it's going to be set to 2. And here we have to specify like the option 1. Now let me save there. Check this out. So here you can see we are now getting this checkbox, and we are also getting these categories right here, which is something that we wanted. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to duplicate that like a few times, maybe 3 times. So I'll just select this li, and I am going to just duplicate that 1 time and another time. So I'll just change that to like 2, and this one 2, 3. Let me just save my file, and this is how it looks like right here. Now underneath this div, I'm gonna collapse this div. We're going to be defining yet another div. So I'll use like the motion.div once again and close them. And here we have to specify not the class name but the variants, and we're going to be using that item variants once again. Okay, so inside this div, we're going to be defining the h3 with the class of text XL, and the font will also be set to totally semi-bold. It's gonna say like price range. So now if I save there, test this out, so we are now getting our price range right here. Now underneath this h3, we are going to be defining the input field, and it's gonna have the type of range, and also you want to specify the minimum height, and the minimum will be set to 0. We also want to provide the maximum, and for the maximum we are going to be setting that to like 100, and the class name will be set to full. And I'm going to also provide the step, not stop but step, and step will be equals to 10. So if I save them, now we are getting this awful looking slider. If I weren't using Tailwind CSS, there wouldn't be cool slider, but yeah, we are getting this awful slider. You can definitely go ahead and change that if you wanted to, but in my case, that's gonna be it. So I'll just collapse that, and underneath this one we have to define yet another div. So I'll use like the motion.div once again, close them, and here we have to provide our variants once again. So I'll use like the items variant, and inside there we have to define the h3 with the class of text XL, and the font will be set to semi-bold. Inside there I'll provide the rating, save our file, and here you can see we are now getting the rating. Now underneath there we're going to be using the ul and then the li. For each li we're going to be providing a label, and for this label we're going to be providing like inline inline flex, and also the items will be set to totally center. Margin for the top will be set to 2. Inside there, not HTML4, inside this label we're going to be defining our input field with the type of radio in this case, and here we have to provide the name, and the name will be set to rating, and the value will be set to 1. I'm going to also provide the class name of like form radio. You know, we're not going to be providing that. Let's just remove the class name from there, save our file, and yeah, we are now getting what you want to call that. So now underneath there we are going to be also using a span with the class of margin for the left of 2. It's going to say like first star, and here you can see we are now getting the stars, and I'm going to also duplicate this li a few times. So that's star 1, 2, 3, 4, and I guess 4 would be fine. So I'll just change there to star 2, and this one to star 3, this one to star 4, and you know what, we want to make that as a 5 star, so I'm gonna also duplicate there one more time and change that to the star 5. That's totally done. So now let's just save our file, and here you can see if I just refresh there, okay, we first of all have to save there. If I just refresh there, we are now getting this amazing looking UI and also the animation. So if I just refresh there once again, yeah, you will see that in a few seconds. So now underneath this div, I'm gonna collapse this div right here. Underneath this div, we are going to be defining our button, which will allow us to hide or show that sidebar. So I'll use the button with the class of absolute, and also the top value will be set to 4, the left value will be also set to 4, the z index will be set to 10, pairing all around will be set to 2, background gray of 800, text totally white and rounded full. Focus stat, we are going to be taking care of the focus stat in a few seconds. So I'll use like the outline will be set to none, and for the label we are going to be providing this label totally dynamically. So if our stat is open, in that situation you want to show one icon, but if that's not the case, you want to show another icon. So I'll use like IOMD and then arrow back. Okay, so I'll also provide the class name of height will be set to 6, width will be also set to 6, and close them. Now here, if that's not the case, we are going to be using like the IOMD arrow forward, and we also have to provide these classes like the height will be set to 6, the width will be also set to 6, and close them. Now this is how it looks like. So if I click on there, nothing will happen. And why? Because we have to provide our event listener on there, or attach our event listener on there. So when somebody try to click on there, we are going to be firing this function, which is a set is open and not is open. So now let me just save my file, If I click on there, that's gone. If I click on there once again, it will make it appear. I also want to make it so that if I click on this icon, I want to hide there. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to the top, and here on this icon, if somebody tried to click on there, on click, so we're going to be firing this function, which is a set is open and not is open. Okay, so now let me just save there. If I click on there, it's going to hide it. If I click on there once again, so it's going to show there, and this is how it looks like. I'm going to also take care of this backdrop, so that's going to be a lot of fun, but this is super simple. So I'll just create a motion.div and close that like so. And here we have to specify our class name, so I'll use like only fix, and inset will be set to 0, background gray of 800 like so. And also on the initial state, it's going to be set to closed, and then on the animate state we can totally show there and also hide there. So if this is open, like if our state is open, then we want to provide the state of open to there from the variants. But if that's not the case, we want to set there to closed state. Okay, so we're going to be also providing a variance today. I'm going to also provide this variance right here. So I'm going to go to the top and create this variant right here. And this is going to be quite simple and easy. So I'll use like const backdrop variant, and inside there we have to provide the open state. And on this open state, we're going to be setting the opacity to 0.6. And now underneath there, on the closed state, we want to change the opacity to totally 0. Okay, so now we successfully provided there. Next, I'm gonna also specify the transition. So I'll use like the transition, and the duration will be set to 0.3. And when somebody clicks on there, we're going to be setting that set is open to false. Now let me just save my file. Now if I click on there once again, it's gonna hide it. Okay, so yeah, that was our basic project. Time to create one of my favorite project, which is called the scrollable carousel, but we are going to be animating there. So first of all, I want to talk about this utils folder. So inside this utils folder, we have this data.ts file, and here you can see I have a few images which I copied from the unsplash.com. If you care to use these images, you can totally find them in my GitHub repository, but if you don't want to use them, you can definitely use your own one if you wanted to. But yeah, I'm going to be using this data for my card images, so I'll just close them, and now let's start working on them. The first thing that I want to do is that I want to define my components. Come on, components folder, and inside there we are going to be defining our scroll carousel.tsx. I'll use the RAFCE and go to my app and register this component right in here. Oh my goodness. And now I'm gonna close this, save my file. Let's get into the scrollable carousel and start working on there. Okay, so I'll use like import motion from where? From the framer motion. I'll save that. Or you know what, we're not going to be using any framer motion in this one. So yeah, we are going to be using that. I'm going to also go ahead and define the card.tsx file and use my RAFCE inside there and import them inside this scrollable carousel. So I'll use like import card, and from card we would also need to grab our data. So I'll use like import, come on, import the cards from where? Come on, cards. From where? From the, let's just go ahead and go to the top, go to the utils folder and choose this data from there. Now that we successfully grab all of the data, we're going to be actually interacting with the DOM. So for that we have to use our target ref. So I'll use like the use ref, and here for the initial value I'm gonna set there to no. We're going to be scrolling, so which means like we would need the use scroll hook from the framer motion. I'll just grab the y scroll from there, so I'll just destructure there from here. I'm gonna say like the scroll on the y progress, we only want to get there. I'm gonna also provide the target, so I'll use like the target, and the target will be coming from the target ref, okay, which we are now specifying as a reference right here. Next we have to define our transform property, so I'll use like the use transform, and here first of all we are going to be providing our scroll on the y progress as a motion value, and then we have to specify our initial state and also our ending state. So when our animation starts from 0, so we want to make the 1%, but if it reaches to 1%, then we want to make it minus 95%, just like that. I'm going to save this file, and I'm going to also store that in the x variable. Now let me go ahead and go to this UI and remove that from here. And I'm going to provide the class names, and it's going to be set to relative. The height will be set to 300 VH, like the viewport height, and background will be set to neutral 900, like so. And for the ref, we are going to be providing our target, come on, target ref inside there. Now inside this div, we're going to be defining yet another div with a class of sticky. The top will be set to 0, flex and height will be also set to screen, items totally center, and overflow will be hidden. Okay, so inside this div, we're going to be defining our motion.div and close them. I'm going to also provide the class name of flex, and the gapping will be set to 4. And for the styling, let me just provide the style right here. We're going to be using this transform value, which is now set to this x. So I'm going to copy that and place it right here. Inside this motion div, we're going to be iterating over through all of that cards. So I'll use like cards.map, and here we have to specify each card. And now inside there, let's just render our card component, which we just created. It's going to take the prop of card, and now let me just close them. We're now using these cards. We're now iterating over through all of that cards, and then we are creating a separate card inside there, as you can see, and we're now passing that each image as a card prop to them. So now let me go ahead and go to the card and start working on this card. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to the top, and here we are going to be destructuring the cards. Or was there a cards? Or yeah, it's just a card. So I'm going to just destructure them and annotate them as a string maybe, or you know what, card and then string. So now let me just save my file, and now we have to use the, I'll remove this card from here, and I'm going to also provide a bit of class, or you know what, we're going to be providing the key. I'm going to provide the key right here. So key or index or idx would be fine. So for the idx, we're going to be passing this index, which will be coming from this card index right here. So I'll just also destructure this index. Let's just destructure them, and I'm going to also annotate that right here. So I'll use like idk. It should be idx. God damn it, idx, come on, idx. And now let me just copy the name of the and destructure the idx instead, and also this idx, this will be a number. So now let me just save there. This is how we are going to be annotating there, but I'm going to also specify this idx right here. That's totally done. I'm going to also provide the class names, and it's going to be set to group, and also relative width will be set to 10 rem. Come on, 10 rem. And I'm going to also provide the height of 10 rem. Overflow will be set to totally hidden, and the background will be set to neutral 200. Inside this div, we're going to be defining another div, and here we're going to be rendering our image. So I'll use like the styling right here, and for this styling, I'll provide the background image first of all, and it's going to be set to this URL. Let's just write a URL and close them. And here we are going to be rendering our image only dynamically. So I'll use like card.url. And now let me just save this file. And now underneath there, we are going to be also providing the background. Come on, not backdrop, but the background will be set to size, and it's going to be set to totally cover. I'm going to also provide the background position, and the background position will be set to totally center, like so. I'm going to also provide a bit of classes to this. So I'll use like only absolute, and the inset will be set to 0, z index will be set to and the transition will be set to transform. I'm going to also provide the duration, and duration will be set to 300. We are going to be setting there to scale of 110. Now let me save my file. Now let me just refresh my file, and now if I scroll down here, you can see we are now getting all of that carousel images right here. And now if I hover my mouse over to each of these images, we are now getting that kind of amazing animation right here. That's also looking cool, and that was our scrollable animation. I'm not scrolling on the x-axis, I'm scrolling on the y-axis, and now if I scroll there, we are now getting all of that images, and that's looking super amazing. Welcome to the new project. So in this one, we are going to be building advanced level sticky navigation bar by using the framer motion. So what do we have to do? First of all, I'm going to go ahead and define my components folder, and inside there we are going to be defining a sticky nav.tsx file. I'm going to also define the card.tsx file as well. Okay, so I'll use the RAFC inside the sticky navigation bar, and also the RAFC inside the card. I'm going to go ahead and define my what do we call it, sticky navigation inside our app. I'm going to save this file, and now let's just start working on that. Okay, so yeah, we already started there. I'm going to import something called the motion. From where? From the framer motion. That's going to be the first thing that we have to do. Next, we have to define our variants so that we can use them inside our animation. So I'll use like, first of all, we're going to be creating the menu variants. Here we have to define our hidden state. When it is hidden, so we're going to be changing the height to 5.6 rem. Okay, and when it is visible, so in that situation, let's just write a visible. In that situation, it's going to be set to 29 rems, and I'm going to also provide a transition to that. So let's just use a transition, and it's going to be set to the duration, and the duration will be set to 0.3 seconds. So that's going to be it for our menu variants. And now let's just create one more for the expand row variants. So I'll use like expand what we have to do, we have to first of all define the hidden state, and when it is hidden, so we are going to be changing the opacity to 0, and also the y-axis will be set to 50. And now underneath there, we also have to define our visible state, and it's going to take the index, and index can be basically anything, so I'll just write like any. I'm going to define the opacity, and the opacity will be set to 1, y-axis will be set to 0 in this case, and also we are going to be attaching a bit of transitions to there. But first of all, we have to wrap them inside the parentheses, so let me just wrap there. Now here we have to specify our transition, so I'll use like transition. That transition will take the delay, and now let's just use the index times 0.1, and then we have to provide the duration, and duration will be set to 0.6. I'm gonna save my file. I'm gonna collapse this one and also collapse that variance. Now let's just go ahead and go to our UI, and I'm gonna remove that from here. I'll use the classes, so I'll use like background of totally black, and minimum height will be set to totally screen. Inside this div, we have to define our motion.div, and I'm gonna close that. So here I'm gonna specify the class name, like it's gonna be set to totally fixed. The top value will be set to 0, the width will be set to totally full, and padding all around will be set to 8, background totally white, and text totally black, rounded totally large, and shadow will also be set to large. So I'm going to save my file right now, and here now we have to specify our variants, so I'll use like the variants, and now we are going to be providing our menu variants inside there. I'm going to also provide the initial state, and for the initial state we're going to be setting that to hidden, and also when somebody hover over there, so in that situation we're going to be setting the state of that to visible, so visible. Inside this motion div, we're going to be defining our div once again, and it's going to have the classes of flex and also the flex of totally column. Inside this div, we're going to be defining yet another div which will have the class of flex. Justify will be set to between, and items will be set to totally center. Inside there, we also have to create one more for the items, so let's just use like item center, and I'm going to also specify margin for the left of 2, and font will be set to semi bold. I'm going to also provide the uppercase on there. Okay, so I'll just write my own name like Hussein. Check this out. So here you can see we're now getting this navigation area. So if I hover over there, so here you can see we're now getting this expanding navigation. So if I leave it back, so it's going to expand it back. Now let me go ahead and take care of the rest of the UI. So now underneath this div, I'm going to go ahead and define another div, so which will have the class of hidden, and also on the medium screen, I'm going to set the to totally flex, and also the spaces on the x-axis will be set to 5. And text of totally center. Inside this div, we are going to be providing an anchor tag which will have the class of text totally black and font of totally bold. And I'm gonna just write like this pound symbol inside there, and I'm gonna say like products. I'm gonna duplicate that a few times, so I'll just change that to like use cases, and also change this one to resources. I'm gonna also duplicate that and change that to pricing. Now underneath this div, we are going to be defining a div. So let's just write like flex, and it's going to be set to the items totally center. Inside there, I'm going to create my anchor tag once again, and which will take this pound symbol, and I'm going to say join. I'm going to also provide the class of text totally black and font of totally light inside there. So now let me just save my file, and here you can see we're now getting this amazing sidebar, but this is not looking that cool. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this font of light from there, and yeah, I guess that's looking better. I can also remove this font of totally boldness from there, so I'll just select there and remove there, and yeah, I guess that's looking cool. Now underneath this div, I'm going to define my motion div once again. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define my motion.div, and I'm going to close there. Inside there, I'm going to also define the classes of flex, and flex will be set to totally column, and pairing for the y-axis will be set to totally 6. Okay, and I'm going to also define the variants inside there. We already created this expand variants, so I'm going to use that inside there. Okay, so now inside this div, we're going to be defining a span which will have the class of totally block, width will be set to totally full, and also height will be set to px, and background gray of 300. And now underneath there, I'm going to define the motion div once again and close them. I'm going to first of all define my variants, and it's going to take the expandable card or expandable row variants. I'm going to also specify the custom value to there, so custom, and here we have to specify one inside there. And for the classes, we are going to be using a flex, and also items will be set to totally center. Margin for the top will be set to 5. Inside there, we have to define our span, and span will have the class of border, and also border totally black, totally rounded full, and pairing for the x-axis of 2, and text will be set to smaller, extra small rather, and it's gonna say apple. Let me just save my file. If I hover over this, we are now getting this line and also this spill of apple. So yeah, that's looking cool. Now underneath this pen, I'm going to define a paragraph which will have the margin for the left of 2. And I'm going to say like MacBook Pro. Let's just say our file and hover over there. So now we are getting this MacBook Pro. And now finally, we have to start working on our custom card. I'm going to start working on there. But now underneath this div, we have to define yet another div. So I'll use like motion.div once again and close them. And here we have to specify that exact same value. So I'm going to copy the name of the, like classes of there and place it right here. So we're going to be using the variants. Custom will be set to 1. And also here we are not going to be providing all of that, but we are going to be only providing a flex, and margin for the top will be set to 5. Okay, so now here we already created this card component, so we have to use that inside this div. So I'll use like card and execute there like so. And this card is going to take a few props, so I'll use like title, and I'm going to set that to like my amazing card or something like that. And the description, I'll say like this is some random description or something like that. And also I'm going to specify the image URL, so I'll use like the image URL, and it's going to be set to this image URL. So you know what, we have to specify it like this. I'm going to place the image URL right here, and this should be HTTP. So let's just write H right here. Check this out. So if I hover my mouse over to there, we are only getting this card because we did not create this card. So now let me just go ahead and go to this card and start working on there. The first thing that I want to do is that I want to destructure all of the props that we are now taking. So I'll use like title. I'm going to also provide the description, description, and also the image URL. Okay, so now we have to create an interface for this. So I'll use like the interface, and then I'm going to give it the name of like card props. And if you guys don't know what in the world is the interface, so you should definitely go ahead and check out my TypeScript course about that. And I'm going to be using a title, and title will be set to a string. Description will be set to string, and also the image, the image URL will be also set to string. I'm going to save my file, copy the name of there. Let's just copy the name of there and annotate there with this card props. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to use this. So I'll just remove that from here. I'm going to specify a bit of classes to this. So I'll use like flex, and flex will be set to column, and margin all around will be set to 5. Background wholly white, rounded large, and shadow will be set to totally large. I'm going to also provide the overflow, and overflow will be set to totally hidden. Okay, so now inside this div, what do we have to do? We have to use our image. So I'll use like the image, and I'm going to also specify the source to them and also the alternative text to there. I'm going to also use the class name, so the width will be set to totally full, and the height will be also set to 28. I'm going to also set that to object totally cover and close there like so. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to grab the image URL, and we have to place there as a source. I'm going to also copy the title and place there as alternative text. So now let me just save my file, and now if I hover my mouse over to there, so it's going to give us the image of that MacBook. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to also use this description. So I'm going to copy the name of there. We have to define a div with the class of padding all around will be set to 4. And inside there, we have to use the h3 with the class of font totally bold and text totally large. And it's going to take their title. First of all, we have to render the title, and then we are going to be rendering the description. So I'll use like text of totally gray, 700, and also margin for the top will be set to 2. And here we have to render their description. Underneath there, we are going to be creating a button which will have a few classes. So I'll use like margin for the top of 4, and background totally black, text totally white, and also pairing for the y-axis will be set to 2, pairing for the x-axis will be set to 4, totally rounded. So I'll just say like learn more or something like that. Now let me just refresh there, and if I hover my mouse over to there, so it's going to give us that card. So if I want that card to be like a lot of time, so I can just duplicate this card, and it's going to give us that card like a lot of time. So yeah, you can totally change the UI if you wanted to. But that was our amazing animated navigation, or sticky navigation to be precise. So before we get into this project, I want you to keep in mind one thing. This project will be a bit advanced, so let's just start working on that. What in the world are we building, and how are we even going to be building there? We are building something called the progress steps, and you will see that in a few seconds. So first of all, we are going to be creating a components folder, components, and we have to define our progress step.tsx file inside there. I'll use the RAFCE. Go ahead and go to our app and register their progress steps right here. And I also want to mention one more thing. So if I go ahead and go to the index.css file, I already specified the background color, and the background color is now set to this color, and we are also changing the color to totally white. Okay, so that's the first thing that we have to do. Next, we have to import something called the framer motion from the motion. I said it wrong. The motion from the framer motion. Okay, so next we have to define our steps. So I'll use like const steps. And here we are going to be creating an array, and inside this array we are going to be defining a few objects. So I'll just provide like the title, and the title will be set to step 1. And also I'm going to be providing a bit of description to them, and for this description I'm going to just say like, I don't know, some sort of like random description. So I'll say like this is the first step or something like that, and I'm going to provide a comma there, and I'm going to duplicate there a few times. So I'll just change that to, I'm going to select them, and yeah, we have to just change the 2, 3 and 4. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to my component, and the first thing that we have to do is that we have to define our current step, and then we have to define our set current step is going to be equals to the use state, and the initial value we have to specify 0 to there. That's done. We also have to go ahead and go to the UI and provide a bit of classes to this. So I'll use like flex, and flex will be set to column, and items will be also set to center. Padding all around will be set to 5. Inside their div we have to define yet another div which will have like relative, and also flex justify will be set to totally between, 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 and also the width will be set to 40 rem. So I'll use like 40 rem and close there. I'm going to also specify margin for the bottom, and inside this div we have to define our motion.div. So I'll use like motion.div, come on div, and close there. On this motion div I'm going to specify a bit of classes to this. So I'll use like absolute, because we are now providing a relative, so this class will be absolute to this relative class. That's done. And also background will be set to totally blue of 500, and I'm going to provide a margin for the top of 1 rem to them. I'm going to also provide a bit of styling to this. So I'll use like the style, and here we have to specify our styling dynamically. So I'll just change the width, and the width will be the dynamic width. So what am I going to do? I'm going to first of all add one parenthesis, and inside there I'm going to attach yet another parenthesis. So I want you to notice we are now working with double parentheses. The first thing that I want to do is that I want to grab this current step, and I'm going to place there. Then we are going to be adding only 0 to there, and now outside from there we are going to be defining the steps dot length, like how many items we have there. You want to divide there by current step plus 1. Okay, outside from there we also have to multiply there to 130%, just like this. Okay, so that's going to be it for our width. I'm going to also specify the transition, so I'll use like the transition, and here we have to specify the width and 0.3 seconds and ease. This is right there, and I'm going to also specify a comma inside there. I'm going to save this file, and now inside this div what do we have to do? We have to iterate over through all of our steps. So I'll use like steps dot map, and we also need the step inside there, come on, step, and also the index from there. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go ahead and define, come on, let's just use our parentheses if I can do that today. I'm going to define my div, and inside this div is going to take a key. So I'll just write a key, and key will be set to an index. I'm going to also provide a class name today. This is going to take a flex, and flex will be set to totally column, and items will be set to totally center, and it's going to be also set to totally relative. Inside there we have to define our motion.div once again and close them. And for this motion div we are going to be attaching a class names, and we are going to be rendering our classes dynamically. So that's why we are now using this template literal. So I'll use like the height will be set to totally 10, width will be set to totally 10, flex and justify will be also set to center. I'm going to also provide the items of totally center today, rounded totally full, and border will be set to 2. So I'm going to save my file right now, and then here we have to specify our styling totally dynamically. So I'll just say like if the index which we are now getting by iterating over through all of the steps, so if that index is less than or equal to the current step, which is the state of our entire component, so if that's the case, so what do we have to do in that situation? We have to change the background color to totally blue of 500. But if that's not the case, we wanted to keep it as background gray of 200. And when somebody hover over this, I'm going to be using like while hover, we only want to scale that to 1.1. And I'm going to also specify the transition, and for the transition we're going to be setting the duration to 0.2 seconds. Inside this div we're going to be rendering our index. So I'll use like if our index is less than the current step, which is going to be our state. So in this situation I'm going to only write this check mark, but if that's not the case, we are going to be setting that to null. Okay, this should be a question mark because we are now using a ternary. And now underneath this div we have to define the paragraph, and it's going to have a few classes. So I'll just define there, and here we have to render our step.title. And now we are going to be defining our class names, and we are going to be defining them totally dynamically. So I'll just use like margin for the top of 2, and here we have to define our index. So if our index is less than or equal to the current step, so in this situation, once again we are going to be changing the text to totally blue of 500. But if that's not the case, we are going to be changing the text to totally gray of 500. So now let me just save my file, test this out. So we are now getting this awful looking UI. We will fix that in a few seconds, but yeah, we have to take care of this UI first of all. Underneath this div, we are going to be defining our motion div once again. So I'll use like motion.div, close there, and here inside there, first of all, we have to provide a bit of classes to this. So I'll use like text of totally center, padding all around of 5, and the width will be set to 40 rem. Close there, and provide the height of 10 rem to there. I'm going to also provide the border and round it totally large. Shadow will be set to totally medium. I'm going to also specify the key, and the key will be that current step. I'm going to also provide the initial state, and initially it's going to be set to the opacity, and opacity will be set to 0. The y-axis will be set to -20. Let's just save our file. Underneath this initial state, we have to provide our animate state, and for this animate state we have to provide the opacity of 1, and the y-axis will be set to 0. I'm going to also provide the exit prop, and for this exit, let's just define our opacity, and opacity will be set to 0, and the y-axis will be set to -20. I'm going to also define the transition, and for this transition we have to define the duration of 0.3 seconds to there. Okay, so finally we have to render our main card. So I'll use the h2, and the classes will be set to text totally extra large and font totally bold. And here we have to render our steps. Come on, steps. And now let's just use our current step, and now get the title out of there. I'm going to duplicate this. Oh, you know, we're not going to be duplicating there. I'm going to be creating a paragraph with the class of margin for the top of 2, and I'm going to duplicate this step right here. So let's just copy there and place there. Instead of providing a title, I'm going to change that to the description. So let's just save our file, and here you can see we're now getting our card, and this is not something that I want, but yeah, we are getting there. Now underneath this motion div, we have to define just a regular div, and we are going to be setting that to flex, margin for the top of 5, and spaces on the x-axis will be set to 4. Inside there we have to create a button, and this button will have a few classes. So first of all, we have to write a previous button, and then we're going to be also creating one more button for the next one. So let's just add that. So I'll use like you know what, change that to the dynamic classes, and pairing for the x-axis will be set to 4, pairing for the y-axis will be set to 2, text of totally white, background blue 500, rounded, and here we have to render our classes totally dynamically. So if our current step is triple equals to 0, so in that situation what we have to do, we have to use the opacity and set that to 50, and also the cursor will be not allowed. Okay, but if that's not the case, we're going to be only using the empty string, which means like we don't want to provide nothing to them. Now underneath there, we are going to be also attaching the disable state, and for the disable state, if the current step is equal to the 0, so we want to just disable this button. And I'm gonna copy this button and duplicate there one time and change a few things inside there. So if our current step in this situation is equal to the steps.length -1, which means like the last element, so in that situation we are going to be setting the opacity to 50, and cursor will not be allowed. And here, instead of providing a current step is equal to 0, we're now going to be attaching like steps.length -1, which means like gives us the last element. And also we are going to be changing that to next. So I'm going to save my file, and something is awfully wrong with my component, and I don't know why. Let me just click on this. So it's going to give us the next one and the previous one, but we also have to attach the on-click event handler. I'm going to attach that, but I don't know what's wrong with my UI. There is something off going on with my UI, so I'm going to have to fix that first of all. I'll just hide there. Oh, you know what? We have to take all of that steps logic, and then we have to close this div like so. And now underneath this div, you know, we have to remove them and render our content right here. Now let me just save my file, and yeah, this is now looking better. And now if I click on there, nothing will happen. But now let me just go ahead and define or attach the event handler on the next button and also on the previous button. Let me just go ahead and go to the previous button, and when somebody clicks on there, we are going to be firing this function, which is a previous step. I'm going to copy the name of there, and also we are going to be attaching event handler on the next button. So when somebody clicks on there, we are going to be firing a next step function. So now let me just go to the top and define there right here. First of all, let's just take care of the previous one, or you know, first of all we have to take care of the next one. So I'll use like next step, and it's going to be equals to this function, and inside there we have to first of all check if our current step is less than the steps dot length minus 1, which means like the last element. Okay, then we are going to be changing the current step to the current step plus 1, which means like basically we are going to be incrementing there. But if that's not the case, like if somebody did not click on the next button and they instead click on the previous button, so we're going to be creating this function. So I'll use like const previous button, and inside there we have to check. So if the current index or the current step is greater than 0, then we're going to be setting the current step to the current step minus 1. I'm going to save my file right now. Now here you can see we're now basically getting our basic animation. If I click on there, here you can see we're now getting a checkbox, and also we are getting this line. If I click on the previous button one more time, we are not allowed to click on there once again because this is the first item. If I click on there once again, the content will totally update, the description will totally update, we're going to be getting an animation, and also this line will cross out to the next step. If I go ahead and click on there once again, we're now getting that same animation, and which is looking cool. So yeah, that's an amazing project. And it was a lot of typing, I know, trust me, that was a lot of typing. So yeah, that was our basic, or not a basic, but our advanced level